They say water is the gentlest element. But on the morning of July 18th, 1107, the waters of Lake Durazzo did something no man alive could forget. They burned. 30,000 Crusaders, soldiers hardened by desert suns, iron discipline, and the promise of salvation, marched toward a quiet Albanian lake that looked harmless, almost serene. Dawnlight stretched across its surface like a polished blade. Birds skimmed the water. Mist drifted like ghostly veils. Nothing warned them that death was waiting beneath that glassy calm. This is the story the church tried to soften, the Crusader chroniclers tried to hide. And the Byzantines? That morning, Crusader scouts knelt at the shoreline and smelled nothing. No oil, no pitch, no smoke, just stillness. They stepped forward, and the lake ignited. Flames erupted across the surface in roaring sheets, swallowing men whole, melting armor to skin, turning bodies into black silhouettes thrashing in liquid fire. Horses screamed, shields buckled. The Crusader front line collapsed into chaos as the heat seared their lungs before their feet even touched the water. Because this was not ordinary fire. It moved against the wind. It clung to flesh. It devoured without mercy. The Byzantines had used Greek fire, not splayed from ships, not hurled in clay grenades, but hidden beneath the water. A weapon no Western army had ever imagined possible. And as the Crusaders died in thousands, one truth took shape. This was not a battle. It was a message, a demonstration of imperial power encoded in horror, a warning to the West that the old empire still possessed secrets older than Rome itself. Tonight, I will show you what really happened at Lake Durazzo. How 1,200 men destroyed an army 25 times their size, how Byzantine engineers weaponized the earth itself, and why this event was never supposed to be remembered. Men do not invent nightmares by accident. They engineer them. The Byzantines had been doing so for centuries. To understand what happened at Lake Durazzo, we must step into the mechanical mind of the empire. An empire that survived not by brute force, but by intelligence, deception, and terror disguised as faith. The Crusaders believed war was a ladder to heaven. The Byzantines believed war was a chessboard, and every piece was disposable. The weapon at Durazzo was not Greek fire in the way Westerners later imagined. Clumsy jars, flaming arrows, ship-mounted siphons. No. This was the work of the Siphonarioi, the imperial corps entrusted with Byzantium's darkest invention. They were more than engineers, they were priests of fire, bound by oaths so severe that entire families disappeared if even a single ingredient of the formula was whispered to an outsider. The penalty for revealing its secrets was not death, it was erasure. Their design for Lake Durazzo was both impossible and elegant. Units of iron and bronze tubes were buried along the lake's perimeter, concealed beneath reeds and rock. Artisans had carved channels beneath the surface, threaded through underground cisterns. Inside those cisterns sat an alchemical cocktail of naphtha, pitch, resin, sulfur, and, if certain forbidden texts are to be believed, small quantities of quicklime and saltpeter. The mixture was stored like a sleeping animal, waiting only for the engineers to awaken it. The fire was not poured. It was exhaled. When the Crusader vanguard marched onto the shore, a Byzantine signalman raised a small bronze icon depicting the Archangel Michael. He lowered it once, then twice. Valves turned in silence. Bellows roared underground. The lake began to breathe. Greek fire did not ignite like wood or coal. It reacted with water itself. Liquid leapt into flame. The Crusaders thought they had stumbled upon sorcery. Some whispered that the Byzantines had summoned the devil. But truth is always crueler. The fire was chemistry far ahead of its age, a mastery of petroleum warfare the West would not rediscover for almost 1,000 years. Heat rolled across the shoreline like a living wave. Crusaders slipped into the water to extinguish themselves and only burned hotter, their screams echoing over the flat Albanian plain. The Byzantines did not charge. They did not shout. They simply watched. Because this was not a battle they wanted to fight. It was one they wanted remembered. The Crusaders called themselves soldiers of God, but by the time they reached Durazzo, they were already ghosts dragging exhaustion behind them. Their campaign had begun with hymns echoing in cathedral halls, banners fluttering beneath Romanesque arches. Pope Paschal II promised absolution. Their families promised glory. But the Balkans had promised something else. On the road to Durazzo, the Crusader force, led by Bohemond of Taranto, bled slowly. Supplies vanished. Local villagers refused to trade. Forest paths were cut at night. Entire detachments vanished without a scream. No heroic charges. No honorable combat. The Byzantines didn't fight where Europeans expected them to fight. They fought where psychology breaks. When the Crusader advance finally reached the western shore of the lake, they thought the Byzantines were retreating. After all, what empire would abandon open terrain? But that was the first trap. The Byzantines weren't retreating. They were inviting. Bohemond's scouts reported nothing unusual. Still waters, low hills, no cavalry, no fortifications, no archers. They didn't see the siphons. They didn't hear the bellows. They didn't notice the reeds that had been cut and replaced, arranged in unnatural angles like the teeth of a hidden predator. Soldiers laughed as they filled their canteens. Some washed their faces in the shallows. Iron boots sank into soft mud. Then the wind changed. The lake's surface rippled, not from weather, not from fish, from ignition. The first to die were not the warriors, but the horses. Their hooves slapped the water as it flashed orange-white. The animals reared, flesh blistering before they understood pain. Riders fell screaming. The Crusader formation bent like metal under hammer strikes. Tight ranks collapsing, shields clattering, men clawing at each other to escape. Bohemond shouted orders, but his voice drowned in the roar of the lake. Hardened veterans threw themselves into deeper water, believing fire must fail where depth increases. They were wrong. Greek fire obeyed no such logic. It floated. It spread. It clung. The Byzantines did not waste arrows. They waited until the panic peaked, until the Crusaders began to trample their own men. Only then did the elites of Constantinople reveal themselves. On the distant ridge, the imperial banner unfurled, the golden double-headed eagle, wings spread over fire. It was not triumph. It was judgment. Because the Byzantines knew this massacre was not the end. It was only the opening act. There are deaths that end pain, and there are deaths designed to teach. The Crusader panic at Lake Durazzo should have ended in retreat, yet it did not. Their commanders forced them forward, convinced the flames were a trick, some surface oil, perhaps a trap that would exhaust itself with time. But Byzantine engineers did not design for minutes. They designed for eternity. The second phase began with sound. Hidden beneath armored tarps, the Siphonariae pulled levers that released compressed air into underground ducts. The lake exhaled again, this time not in sudden eruption, but in a slow, expanding breath. Flames rolled outward like the unfurling of a demonic parchment. A carpet of fire devoured the shallows, stretching further and further, forming a burning crescent around the Crusader vanguard. Screams changed pitch. They became less human, more animalistic. The smell of cooked flesh drifted across the water in thick, sweet rot.
Medieval armor was not meant for this. Iron plates trapped heat against a body, turning a knight into his own oven. Men ripped their breastplates open with frantic hands, nails cracking, skin peeling. Bohemond himself tried to forge order out of chaos. From a stone outcrop, he raised his sword and shouted that God would not abandon them. But the lake answered first. A second row of siphons ignited. Columns of fire shot upward like the breath of dragons, too tall, too focused, too engineered to be natural. Chroniclers would later insist the Byzantines summoned hellfire. Monks in Italy claimed the devil himself walked across the Balkan shores that morning. But the truth was far colder. Byzantine science stood centuries ahead, a fusion of petroleum geology, alchemical experimentation, and state-sponsored secrecy. And then came the cavalry, not the Crusaders, the Byzantines. A wedge of 200 cataphracti, full armored riders on armored horses, descended from the ridge. Their hooves struck the earth in a slow, thunderous rhythm, like a war drum marking the moment between life and extinction. They did not charge into the flames. They cut through the edges where survivors staggered, blinded, and burned. Their lances struck with surgical cruelty. They didn't slaughter to win. They slaughtered to break the myth of Western invincibility. Bohemond saw something then he had never seen before. Soldiers begging enemies to kill them quickly. Men kneeled in fire, raising their arms toward the cataphracti, praying for steel to end what flame could not. And the Byzantines obliged, not out of mercy, but because the nightmare had more stages yet. What happened next was never taught in Western monasteries because it did not fit the mythology of noble crusaders. The massacre at Lake Durazzo was not a battlefield defeat. It was a controlled demonstration. The cataphracti did not pursue fleeing men. They herded them, pushing clusters of survivors deeper toward the flaming water, forcing them to choose between boiling death and Byzantine steel. The Crusaders who attempted to break around the lake were met by infantry in lamellar armor, silent as executioners. Shields locked, spears angled downward. They advanced in measured steps, driving the burning mass of humanity into the inferno they themselves had prepared. It was then Bohemond understood the trap had not been improvised. It was engineered for him, for his legend, for his arrogance. Months earlier, Byzantine spies circulated in Italian ports, whispering rumors of Balkan weakness and imperial decay. Merchants accidentally left maps of undefended routes. Strategists lured Bohemond into believing Constantinople was vulnerable, ripe for conquest. He imagined another Antioch, another city wrested from the east. But the Byzantines were not nomadic tribes or desert kingdoms. They were heirs to the Roman machine. And machines do not forgive trespasses. Within the smoke, Byzantine officers issued orders in a cold, dispassionate tone. Do not destroy the command. Bohemond was worth more alive than dead. His ransom could cripple Western budgets, fracture alliances, stir political feuds. Empire did not need corpses. Empire needed leverage. As dusk bled into the horizon, the lake did not fade. Greek fire did not behave like ordinary flame. It fed itself on air, on motion, on panic. Flames drifted across the surface like serpents hunting prey, drawn to movement, swallowing bodies still alive, still screaming. The Byzantines withdrew their cavalry in perfect formation. The infantry tightened their lines. And then the final blow fell, not physical, but psychological. Trumpets sounded from the hilltops, and from the mist gate the imperial banner rose again. Crusaders stared at it through blistered eyes, and the realization hit them like divine betrayal. They were not fighting God's enemies.
They were fighting the empire that had invented the cross as a symbol of power long before Europe understood its meaning. The survivors stumbled. Some prayed, some cursed, some simply stopped thinking. Because a man who has seen water burn no longer believes heaven is listening. Night fell over Durazzo, and the lake glowed like an unholy altar, its surface pulsing with orange veins, licking at the darkness as if eager for more blood. The screams had thinned, not because mercy had arrived, but because throats had been burned away, lungs collapsed, voices shredded to ash. The Byzantines stood at a distance, watching as one watches a storm, calm, analytical, emotionless. When the last pockets of Crusaders attempted to escape, they discovered the true prison. Behind them, shallow ravines had been filled with dry reeds and sealed with wax. As the panicked remnants stumbled through, the reeds were lit. Narrow corridors of fire closed around them like the jaws of a serpent. They ran, collided, begged, some even charged Byzantine lines, hoping to be cut down. But the spears did not yield. The empire did not waste its enemy. It consumed him. By dawn, Lake Durazzo was a graveyard of twisted metal and charred bodies. Armor plates floated like broken scales. Horses lay on their sides with jaws frozen open, hooves curled inward. The smell, my God, the smell, was something even veterans could not describe. Burning oil, flesh, hair, leather, ash. A scent so thick it clung to the inside of the nostrils. Men vomited until they bled. Others stared in silence, unable to speak at all. Bohemond of Taranto was taken alive. His armor was torn away, not by flame, but by Byzantine hands. He was escorted east, through valleys, past monasteries, into the bowels of Constantinople, where the emperor sat waiting. Alexius I Komnenos did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply spoke. You believed you could take Rome from its rightful heirs. You believed strength was measured in numbers. And in that moment, the Crusader prince realized the true horror. The Byzantines did not win because they were stronger. They won because they understood the simple truth that European warlords never grasped. Fear is a resource. It can be harvested, refined, weaponized. A burning lake was not a tactic. It was propaganda carved in fire. Chroniclers back home tried to bury the event. They called it an accident, a failed crossing, a misfortune of terrain. But every soldier who survived Durazzo spoke of it differently. They said the East breathes flame. They said the empire held secrets older than Christ. They said that on that day, in Albania, water had turned against mankind, and the earth itself had chosen its master.